Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Karen Betancourt. Karen is the CEO of Vanguard Medical Logistics, a company that supports the manufacturing, storage, and transportation needs of medical supply chains in Central and South America. So, hi, Karen. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, I shared a little bit about what you and your company currently do in the intro, but what else is it useful or interesting for people to know about your background?
Interesting is always difficult because people find things differently interesting. But I would say I spent nearly 7 years at Amazon, which makes me an old timer there. A year and a half at Walmart, and then pivoted into medical with 2.5 years of Cardinal Health. I advise various startups on how to actually operationalize things. And I've started my own podcast. But that is pretty much the only pseudo-interesting things about me.
Well, we love having podcasters on the podcast, so that is awesome to know. Do you want to share the name of the show? Is it in context with what we're doing today? Because we'd love to plug it if you're interested in sharing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Business Casuals with Karen Betancourt. And it's meant for kind of your podcast is fantastic about sourcing specific, but mine is a little bit more the variety of different business things that can come at you and an in-depth conversation with one guest each time. So shamelessly stealing the second portion of your podcast, but it's a different scope of topics.
Well, that is the best thing about podcasts. It is a community that just builds on the creativity and creation of the shows out there. Now, you mentioned some of those companies that you've worked for in the past, some really big name, well-known companies. I'm sort of curious about the experience of working for those firms. You know, we all think like, oh, to work at an Amazon, oh, to work at a Target or a Walmart. But what is really, let's say, unique about the experience of working at companies like that?
Oh, that is such a good question. So I think there are a lot of really awesome things. And then there are some things that sometimes take a specific personality to be able to do long term. So what I would say is awesomeness is they didn't get that large without having processes. And particularly for sourcing, wow, any of those companies are going to be well versed in what to do. The downside of that can be sometimes you feel like you're just part of a machinery as opposed to setting and enhancing direction. And the company culture at any company that is larger than, I would say, 5,000 people is very dependent on what team you're in and who you're interacting with. And so you can get these, oh my gosh, I want like a FANG company on my resume. I want like a huge retailer. I want a Target or a Walmart. And then you get into it and you go, oh my gosh, this is not at all like the company, the overall company culture. And so learning to navigate in that, learning to leverage really, really well thought out, fantastic processes is a great training ground. But I think sometimes if you're a person who likes to push the envelope a little bit, sometimes you can find that those cultures are not quite as open to that.
Interesting. Now, the other thing that we get to benefit from hearing about from you is that you've held a lot of executive level positions, but now you have the executive level position, which is CEO. What differences have you noticed between holding sort of a SVP, VP type of title versus being really the person whose name is, if we still used stationery, would be on the letterhead, right? Having that sort of ultimate top position.
Oh, another excellent question. And I would say two things. One, in those areas where I had an executive role that was commanding a particular section, it's very easy to look at the CEO and go, why did they make that stupid decision? Or this was a priority and it gets changed due to another priority. That's the biggest thing that I would say. When you're the CEO, you're actually the one who's weighing all of those spaces and having to make a decision that may mean that you are actually sub-optimizing an initiative you have been pushing. And there's some times that I've struggled a little bit because sometimes the right business decision is to deprioritize one of my own pet peeves from back in the day or something else. And it's really that having that different visibility and then having to make those calls. And then the second piece is I am not actually doing my job if I do the job of the people who are in the roles. And coming up and working my way up through the trenches, I know how to do a lot of these jobs, frankly, sometimes better than the people who do them. And stopping myself and coming out and being a resource or an arbiter and keeping an eye on, where are we going 5, 10, 15 years out, not just the next month. It has been something that I would like to say I seamlessly got into it. And instead, no, I have to remind myself frequently that they need to grow and learn just as I grew and learned to be able to do it.
Now, last question for you sort of in this area. We always also like to think about the idea of career progression and how might a role in procurement or supply chain or logistics end up playing out as you climb the ladder. You've held a lot of roles in supply chain as well as in transportation. What would you say about those experiences or having that depth of perspective on the business in the supply chain realm helps you now as you're sitting in that CEO's chair?
It is invaluable. The reality is almost everyone, unless you're a data only or a software only space, is moving something. You're either dependent on something moving to you or you're moving things as components and you're sourcing. Being able to understand what's actually going into the operation makes me ask better questions. It makes me focus on what the right solution is. And it allows me to have real perspective that I think if you don't have that perspective based on sourcing or procurement or supply chain, you get a little too focused sometimes on, I need 3 cents off the cost of the widget.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, the macroeconomic forces are saying that hell, I'm going to be able to do that. Apologies. But it gives good perspective to focus on, okay, instead of fighting against something or deciding that someone in sourcing or procurement isn't doing their job, or we need to renegotiate something and that will solve everything. Let's look at actually what are our assumptions? Is it feasible to do this? And do we need to come up with another solution as well? And so I would say my experience has been really, really invaluable in that.
Now, that provides us with a great segue as we start talking about some of these opportunities that procurement has to influence the business, working with external markets. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your general philosophy on procurement as a function, as a profession, as a field? Generally, how do you regard procurement within the business?
I think procurement is a space that gets a bad rap. It is too frequently pulled in way too late in the process, where it then fulfills the perspective that many people have about procurement, which is it's the team that is a pain in the butt, that forces you to go pick 3 vendors to do competitive bids when it's clear that only one of them will do it and puts you behind the 8 ball. In my experience, that is almost always because a decision has been made without including procurement. So they don't have ability to either educate or to inform, or they're just given something like, hey, we've decided to change all of our packaging and our unit counts for this item. The new packaging has to have 14 colors on it, and it all needs to launch in time for this Easter. Any procurement officer who got that information on the, November 25th is going to be shaking in their boots because there's absolutely no way you can implement something like that. But that's a way a lot of things come down because people aren't including procurement. And because procurement and sourcing very frequently are left out of the conversation, I think that sometimes they've given up on trying to get back into the conversation. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is absolutely terrible for everyone involved.
Now, I don't know if you're hearing that, Karen, but if you listen very closely, you can hear every single listener in this audience going, yes, yeah, exactly. That's what we have been trying to say.
bring us in sooner, give us realistic objectives, understand what we're trying to do. I think absolutely so. Philosophically around procurement, we're completely aligned with the desire to really have an impact, the challenges that procurement is up against. And these challenges seem to follow us from company to company and industry to industry. Have you noticed any potential benefit or potentially even a downside, depending on where procurement reports up through the business? So, in other words, can procurement's alignment at the highest functional level impact their ability to satisfy those objectives positively or negatively?
Oh, absolutely. I have seen procurement uh, reporting up into CFOs, where it becomes all dollars and cents. You better be the lowest cost bid. I've seen procurement reporting into operations where sometimes it works spectacularly, and then other times procurement is merely a mechanism for that operations team to get the result they wanted. And then procurement goes to battle with compliance and audit when many things don't get handled properly. But yes, it does have it's tied very clearly to the corporate projected objectives. And whether or not you have anyone in procurement or sourcing who's trying to break out of that woe is me sometimes, and we all feel it. In transportation, I have felt woe is me many different things. But the reality is you have to break out of it. You have to educate people, and you have to be a source of either creativity or innovation, showcasing examples of when procurement is an asset as opposed to the dreaded compliance related space that so frequently people relegate it to. And we were going to people are better than that. My apologies.
No, absolutely. If procurement is trying to escape that woe is me, we're saying, okay, my reporting structure is what it is. The business is what it is. But I am on a personal level going to try to change the trajectory, the influence that procurement has internally.
Yes.
What advice do you have that we could potentially try, either on a team level or on an individual level, to start to change the types of relationships and connections and the level of influence that procurement or, frankly, anybody else has within the business?
Well, the number one thing you can do is go talk to the people that you either given up talking to or no one has thought to go talk to, and go and find your informal allies. Is number one. So go find out why they despise the procurement team or they only involve them at the very last minute. So unfair. They're great people in procurement, but too frequently they are lambasted with dislike. Second of that is invite the people you want into the meetings. So if you have a pain in the butt finance partner and you're reporting into finance, invite them to the meetings. Let them get educated on what that is. So frequently we let people say no because we silo ourselves. And so we have the operations meeting. We're like, oh, Kelly, you explained why this is strategically important. Marketing has a big push for it. Okay, cool. Not a problem. But then we let finance not be in that discussion, or we let whomever else be. Maybe it's manufacturing not be in that discussion. And so then you're trying to deal with kind of warring factions as opposed to bringing them all together. So, but you have to go in, you have to explain what you're trying to do. There is always someone who's willing to talk to you and work with you. You might have to go and talk to a couple people in each group, but you're going to find someone and then start testing it. Have that discussion and engage with them.
And it's such great advice because when someone is difficult to deal with, the first thing we all do is figure out how to not meet with that person. I'm just speaking for myself. You know what? Frank is difficult. Whatever you do, make sure we have the meeting on the day we know Frank's not coming into the office, because we're all just looking for an easier path. But there's probably a reason why Frank is the way he is, and at least giving him the opportunity to sort of air his perspective, whether or not he gets to make the final decision. I think that is such fantastic advice because we all have somebody like that, or multiple somebodies. And it kind of flies in the face of our instinct as people to avoid those people that give us a hard time.
Yes, it would be wonderful if we only ever got to work with people who are all aligned with us.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Like, oh my gosh, that would be amazing. That is not real life. And instead of like begrudgingly only like dreading it to the point that you actually create a situation where Fred can come and yell at you or block your project,
Yes.
involve Fred on the front end and get that over with. It's always less painful to deal with your objections up front than it is to deal with them when the clock is ticking.
Yeah. And people are so fascinating. I mean, regardless of what function you're in, what business you're in, what industry you're in, at the end of the day, it all really does come down to people, how you work with them, how you understand them. And you've had a range of opportunities to work in different geographies and companies and cultures. You talked about the fact that now you're focused on Central and South America. What are some of the cultural differences you have noticed in that time?
Oh, that is a great question. So, my dealings with U.S. companies, which is the majority of my career, but very focused on cost, either speed or cost. Rather, either cost does not matter at all, and we have to do something fast, or cost is the only thing that matters. Europe, a healthier balance, but definitely focused on cost. And then in Central and South America, it is relationships above all else and what is actually feasible. There are pros to each side and there are downsides to other. My opportunity area here has been we have to keep a stronger eye on whether or not there's silent kickbacks because that is a mechanism that smooths trade in Central and South America. In the US, there are also silent kickbacks, but frequently that is just the person goes to work there after 5 years. And in Europe, I haven't quite figured it out, but I'm very confident from the number of times various companies get in trouble that they also have that. So there is corruption or misalignment in every one of them. It is a little more open here, or you have to be aware of it. But it's due to this relationship space, which actually makes dealing with people far more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that it's necessarily bad, although I'm absolutely anti-kick and drive. But I see why it happens, and yet there's such beauty of being focused with relationships.
And part of the nice thing about those relationships is that, yes, sometimes culture is fixed by society. It could be fixed by a company that's been around for a long time or a team that has very strong personalities on it. But there are ways to move the needle on culture through relationships, through bonding. In fact, you not that long ago shared a post about cooking for your team, those kinds of human interaction opportunities. What is the professional or corporate power that can come from that kind of human connection opportunity?
Oh, I think the list of things that you lose when you don't have that kind of connection is is too large to mention. But you get humans are the thing. I say this all the time, but humans are the single most successful species on the planet because we cooperate. And we cooperate most when people understand who they're dealing with and they enjoy working with each other and they just kind of get what's going on. So, right, 70% of communication is nonverbal. You kind of need to understand and know what's going on. So when you are feeding people or when you're building a connection, what you're doing is you are paying into a purse of relationship capital that allows you a little bit more space as you're busy trying to figure things out. The world can be a nasty place at times. It can throw every company for a loop. And when you're all on the same page or you all trust and know who you're surrounded by, you are far more resilient as a team and as a company. And that's built, I believe, in those little moments where people are interacting as humans, where they feel valued and where they do not feel like they're a cog in the machine or, just a line item on a spreadsheet. And unfortunately, a lot of times as companies scale, they go to line item in a spreadsheet. So.
Yeah. And no, nobody does want to be that number on the sheet entry in a database. And so as we start to wind down the conversation, this focus on humanity really actually provides a great slide into what my listeners will know is our tradition here at the Sourcing Hero podcast. Every single guest answers or gets the choice between answering one of these two questions, Karen. So here are your options. You can pick either question. There are no wrong answers. Either what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Oh, I will go with the second because I think it's desperately needed at pretty much every single company. Always, but even more so now. So heroism in a business context means advocating for what you want, but it means standing up and having a position. So do not be the silent person who doesn't agree and just goes, you know what, I'm not going to disrupt anything. I'm just going to go away and I'm going to keep my dissent to myself and then just hold on to it. Whether that's something that's blatantly wrong and people should be speaking up for it, or just merely a different perspective on something. Corporate heroism means advocating. It means speaking up. It means realizing that everyone is in a meeting because their voice is important. And if you are not contributing in a meeting, you need to be heroic enough to say, I don't need to be in the meeting. But speaking up and adding the value that your brain and your perspective add. I mean, that is absolutely heroism. I don't think anything close to what most corporate environments do. Many people just take notes in a meeting and then they go away, right? If you're in a meeting as a hero, you are obligated to contribute to the discussion, or ask yourself why, as a hero, you just showed up and did nothing.
That is a great question. I mean, and we're talking about heroism, right? But we shouldn't minimize the courage it would take in a lot of environments to say, and not to be like, I'm just going to, start ghosting this weekly meeting, but to actually say, listen, everyone, wonderful meeting. I don't think this is a place I'm adding value. I can add more value by spending my time in another place. That in and of itself could even start a cycle of positive improvement where people start questioning where and how they spend their time and expect themselves to have impact. I think that's a really interesting and different way of looking at sort of the typical meeting structure and where we spend our time.
No, I'm passionate about it. People have meeting creep and their calendars fill up. And if they're honest with themselves, probably 60-70% of those meetings, they don't say a word.
Yeah.
Why on earth are you attending a meeting over and over again where you say nothing? Just ask yourself that. Take that time back.
Karen, if people are meeting you for the very first time during this conversation, love your outlook, want to actually cheer to you about what you've recognized about procurement and the opportunity for value, what is the best way for people to reach out and get in touch or connect?
LinkedIn is a fantastic platform. I use it all of the time, probably too much. But I get DMs. I answer all of my DMs myself. So posts, those kind of things. You can always reach me through the company website, but LinkedIn, you're going to get straight to me. So find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect.
Excellent. Karen, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.